This presentation will talk about the reactions associated with life. So let's look at the two types of reactions that do support life. They either use photosynthesis or respiration, and certainly plants will use a combination of both, while animals just use respiration. Plants use photosynthesis and they make glucose, which stores energy for later use. And then respiration releases the energy that's stored through the glucose that's made by photosynthesis. Animals use respiration to release the energy from food they have eaten and then absorbed. And glucose is one of the main forms of food that can be used as energy, but there are others as well. Photosynthesis uses a series of chemical reactions that produce glucose. Glucose is a molecule that stores energy, as we said before, and that's created by the plants that absorb sunlight. So glucose can be thought of as a plant's food, and photosynthesis can be summarized in the following. So, carbon dioxide, which is in the air, and then water, which the plant gets from the ground, there is a reaction, and this stuff called chlorophyll allows that reaction to happen, and actually, if you like, is the manufacturing plant, where from carbon dioxide and water, and the sunlight is the energy into that chlorophyll, will create glucose plus oxygen gas. The glucose is put into the plant and stored for later use. The oxygen gas is released to the atmosphere. So obviously plants not only have this important reaction to create food for themselves so they can exist, they also convert carbon dioxide into oxygen gas, which is so important for animal life on the earth. And we can look here, here's a representation of it in a balanced chemical reaction using chemical symbols. So our carbon dioxide and our water reacts when sunlight shines onto the chlorophyll in plants, that's the green stuff, and it produces glucose for the plant and then oxygen for the atmosphere. As long as the sun is shining and it's enough light on the plant, plants can manufacture all the food it needs from carbon dioxide and water. Photosynthesis will take place in any part of the plant that is green and exposed to sunlight. So any part of the plant that is green has this stuff called chlorophyll, which helps manufacture its food. Leaves are the most exposed part of the plant, and so that's where most of the photosynthesis takes place. And if you have a look at a plant, you'll see that most leaves don't overlap that much. The plant tries to spread its leaves as far as possible so it can get the maximum amount of photosynthesis. If we have a look at the leaf structure, we can see how that actually happens. And we're going to have a look at a leaf in a minute, which has been viewed by a scanning electron microscope, so it is magnified many times. And then we'll also look at an image of the inside of a leaf on the next slide. So here's the leaf that's seen by scanning electron microscope, and you can see all these little structures and spaces here, which we'll explain in the next slide. Okay, if we look at this, we can see at the top, or the surface, called the cuticle. It's like the skin of a leaf, if you like to call it that. And then below that, there's these surface cells, which again is a bit like our skin, And then below that are these green long things, and they're called chloroplasts. Now this is where all the business end of the leaf is, if you like, where the sun shines down and the chloroplasts are here. And what will happen then is that this is where photosynthesis takes place. Now, how that happens is you'll see down the bottom here these things called stomata. They're actually little holes in the leaf. And when they open, it allows gases to come in from the air. And what this will do is take carbon dioxide from the air. It comes in, and there's little passageways that will take it up near the chloroplast where it diffuses into those structures, and then photosynthesis can take place. Once it's done, then it can be shipped out to the plant, and you'll see these little pipes down here, the xylem and the phloem. These pipes are the things that take water in. So the xylem takes the water into this area from the ground, and the phloem takes the glucose out to the plant and it stores it. I remember this by saying the glucose is sort of syrupy or a bit thick. So these, I call it the phlegm, and if you think of that, you can think of the syrupy glucose going down the phlegm and the water coming up the xylem from the roots. So that's basically what a leaf looks like. And these, as I said, these stomata, or little holes in the leaf, are an important part of how the gases get into the leaf itself. What does photosynthesis need? Well, it needs carbon dioxide and water to be able to proceed, and it also needs sunlight to power it, because it's the sunlight shining on the leaf that allows the photosynthesis to take place. And if we look at this picture, it just quickly shows that the sun shines on the chlorophyll in the chloroplasts. It produces glucose and oxygen when the sun is shining, and then the water comes up from the soil, from the xylem, and then the glucose is shipped around the plant in a little piping called the phloem. Sunlight passes through that colourless cuticle, that's that top skin, if you like, and then goes into the cells below, which contain the chloroplasts and which have the chlorophyll. Within the chloroplast is that green coloured stuff called chlorophyll, and that's the chemical that allows this conversion from light energy, from sunlight, into chemical energy, and that creates the glucose and oxygen. These chloroplasts also contain enzymes that speed up the reaction. There's a bit like a catalyst, and it helps the reaction go faster. Now, as we said, water is carried from the roots up in the xylem or the veins into the leaf. So that's why it's important to water plants, otherwise they can't, if they're dry, they can't carry out photosynthesis. And then that water moves from the veins or from the xylem into the chloroplasts. Carbon dioxide moves by a process called diffusion, same as how gases get from our lungs into the bloodstream, and they enter the leaf through tiny openings called stomata. Because the concentration of carbon dioxide in the air is higher than that in the leaf, because photosynthesis has used it up in the leaf, it will tend to then move into the leaf because of that change in concentration. And then it continues to move by diffusion. So once it's got into the little cavity, if you like, with the stomata, it will then diffuse across the cell membrane into the chloroplasts and get converted. And if we have a look here, here's a highly magnified section of a leaf, and you'll see that these little stoma or stomata, if it's plural, when they're open, you can see that opening there. That's how the gas gets into the leaf. And then they can close up and stop gases coming in as well. And this happens for a number of reasons. In particular, when it's stinking hot, they don't want to have that open, and so that the leaf can then lose a lot of the water that's already in there. Now, respiration is the other main reaction that supports life. And both plants and animals need a constant supply of energy in order to be able to function and live. And they get this from a process called respiration, which releases energy from glucose. Now, there's a couple of other things involved, but glucose is the main one that it takes energy from. And plants obviously get their glucose from photosynthesis. Animals get their glucose from digestion of the food they eat, including both plants. And also they can get that from protein as well. Now, glucose molecules are made up of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen molecules. And when energy is released, when these molecules are broken up into smaller ones, the energy then is available to the organism for things like growing, repair, movement, and reproduction. And plants use a form of respiration called aerobic respiration to release energy. Animals also use aerobic respiration most of the time. So when you're walking around and sitting in class and so on, you're using aerobic respiration. Now, aerobic respiration needs a supply of oxygen as well as glucose because it effectively burns it up. And that's why you breathe. When the exercising rate and depth of breathing moves as carbon dioxide waste while supplying more oxygen to the bloodstream. So your lungs allow that gas transfer into your bloodstream, and that takes it around to your cells. And then if we have a look at the next slide, you'll see a person doing exercise and the gas flow from respiration is being measured. And there it is there. There's our guy doing exercise and measuring that gas flow. And if we look at the reaction, so it's glucose, which is this C6H12O6 here, plus oxygen goes to carbon dioxide and water and energy. Now, energy is stored in a compound called ATP. It's like your biological battery, if you like. And then that is transferred to other parts of the body where it helps reactions occur so that your body can live and build and grow and repair and so on. As we said, glucose is brought to the cells of the plant by phloem. Oxygen diffuses into the plant from the atmosphere through the stomata in the green parts of the stems and leaves. And the products of respiration are carbon dioxide and water. Now, carbon dioxide diffuses out of things called the mitochondria, that's where respiration takes place, into the sap that fills the rest of the cell. Some of the carbon dioxide is taken in by the chloroplasts and used in photosynthesis, so that's pretty good, it recycles a bit. And the rest is breathed out, if you like, through the stomata, so it can be released, gases can be released from there as well as picked up. And the water also diffuses from the plant cell and evaporates. And that can exit the stomata in the form of water vapor. So just like we breathe out carbon dioxide, but we also breathe out some water vapor, so do plants. In humans, the bloodstream of the animal, such as humans, carries glucose and oxygen to the cells. And glucose is one of the products of digestion of food. Oxygen breathes in and then through it moves down narrower and narrower tubes and diffuses through the lungs alveoli, which are tiny little sacs next to blood vessels that allow that gas to get into our blood. And there's a picture in the next slide that looks at the lungs and how those little tubes get smaller and smaller. The blood also carries away the wastewater and carbon dioxide from the cells. And here's our lungs, and you can see that network of tubes, and how that oxygen finally gets into the bloodstream. Some water is also reabsorbed by the bodies, and some is removed by the kidneys, and that's then excreted as urine. Other water is breathed out as water vapour. On a cold morning, you can see your breath, and that's water vapour. Carbon dioxide diffuses from the blood out into the alveoli of the lungs, and it's breathed out too. So, we can compare the chemical equations for photosynthesis and respiration. As we can see that the two processes are exact opposites of each other. So photosynthesis is the opposite reaction to respiration. So photosynthesis makes glucose and respiration uses it. Both processes also use energy storage molecule called ATP. I call this the biological battery, and it's shipped around the body or the plant to help reactions occur. Now, the two processes differ though, and we'll just have a look at the next table just to have a look at that. So, photosynthesis makes glucose while aerobic respiration uses it. Photosynthesis uses carbon dioxide and aerobic respiration makes it. Photosynthesis makes oxygen. Aerobic respiration uses oxygen, but they both use ATP. Why? Because this is the body's battery that powers lots and lots and lots of reactions. The photosynthesis has two reactions. It has the light reaction, which makes oxygen and glucose, and then the dark reaction where it actually uses respiration. So it uses oxygen and makes carbon dioxide. In both cases, enzymes, which are little protein molecules, speed up the reaction. This photosynthesis occurs in the chloroplasts, which is the green part of the plants, but aerobic respiration occurs in the mitochondria, which are little things in the cell of all living things. Photosynthesis shuts down at night, but aerobic respiration happens continuously.